I'll never forget the morning I got back from half a year of traveling alone across Southeast Asia. I was still wearing yesterday's clothes, dragging my suitcase out of a rideshare, and dreaming about a hot shower in my little fixer-upper I'd finally saved enough to buy. I was dead on my feet, jet-lagged to the point of hallucinating, when I heard a voice cut through the quiet street like a siren. "Your truck is illegal." I looked up, blinking in disbelief, and there she was, the president of the neighborhood association, binder clutched to her chest like body armor, marching straight toward me like she was responding to a 5-alarm fire. I hadn't even set down my luggage before she snapped that I was in violation of section whatever, subsection blah blah, and that she was calling the police. Imagine it'd been gone for 6 months, surviving on $20 a day in Bangkok, haggling over fried rice and visa extensions, and the first thing that greets you back home is a woman in pressed khakis dialing 911 because your moving truck's been parked for 2 hours. When the police officer showed up, a guy who looked like he'd seen way too many HOA disputes in his career, he checked both sides of the street, shook his head, and basically said, "Ma'am, this is not a crime. It's your association business." He handed me an incident number like a pity gift and drove off. She, on the other hand, acted like she'd just won a court case and gave me exactly 1 hour to move the truck. Then she strutted back to her shiny silver car parked in the best visitor spot, vanity plates, and all that, as I later found out, had been sitting there untouched for 3 years. That was my welcome home party. Now, I'll admit, in that first moment I was too tired to fight back. But something about her smug little smile got under my skin. I figured I'd let it slide, maybe laugh about it later. Until my neighbor, a kind woman named Rachel, showed up with coffee and whispered, "She does this to everyone new." That's when it clicked. This wasn't about a parking rule. This was about power. And suddenly, I felt all those instincts I'd built up on the road, reading people fast, spotting scams before they got me into trouble, kicking in again. Rachel told me stories that made me choke on that coffee. A $150 fine for a flower pot that was the wrong shade of terracotta. A violation for wearing unprofessional clothing while unloading groceries after work. It was clear this woman, Margaret Stone, HOA president for the past 3 years, wasn't just enforcing rules, she was inventing them as weapons. And the way Rachel's eyes darted nervously toward Margaret's house, I realized most people here had just learned to live in fear. Later that night, an older man across the street, John, waved me over. He'd been sipping tea on his porch while watching my whole introduction to the neighborhood unfold like free entertainment. When I mentioned the parking debacle, his face shifted from amusement to something sharper. "Son," he said, leaning closer, "that car of hers has been squatting in visitor parking since September of 19. 3 years, 2 months. She claims a medical exemption. Funny thing, I've got the original HOA handbook. There's no such exemption." He winked, and I knew right then I'd stumbled onto the first real crack in her little kingdom. By the next evening, I was sitting on my floor surrounded by boxes, jet lag be damned, with a highlighter and 2 versions of the HOA rulebook. The original, crisp and fair, and Margaret's updated edition stuffed full of creative amendments, all suspiciously designed to benefit one person. She'd even invented something called a presidential vehicle allowance, which let her bill her car payments, insurance, even maintenance, straight to the HOA account. $850 a month for 3 straight years. Over 30 grand, stolen right out from under everyone. The next day, like clockwork, she struck again. A violation notice slid under my door, non-compliant perimeter fencing. Fine, $200. Deadline, 72 hours. She'd flagged the white picket fence that came with my house white in every real estate photo. White for decades before I got here as a disruption to neighborhood harmony. I laughed, then grabbed my phone and started photographing everything: her car, the leaves piled around its tires, the visitor parking sign she ignored. If she wanted a documentation game, I was about to play championship level. And that's when Rachel showed up again, grinning. I kept my receipt from her so-called parking fee scam. Want it? Yes. Yes, I did. We built our little war room with binders, receipts, photos, Rachel, and eventually John, who started handing over original blueprints and development documents like he'd been waiting for someone to ask. The more I dug, the sicker I felt. Margaret wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was running the entire community like her personal ATM, Fake maintenance invoices billed to the HOA but delivered to her own house. Legal consultation fees timed perfectly with her divorce. Even grocery charges disguised as board refreshments. It wasn't a coincidence. It was systematic theft. When the board finally convened that Thursday night, I walked into the community center with Rachel by my side, clutching her own folder of fines, and John lingering in the back like he was watching a courtroom drama. Margaret sat at the head table, navy blazer, pearls, a fortress of binders stacked high. She launched into her speech about recent disruptions while staring daggers at me. Then Rachel stood up, voice trembling but clear, and asked the simplest question. Which medical authority approves permanent parking exemptions? Because I've never seen documentation. You could have heard a pin drop. Board members stared at their coffee cups. Margaret sputtered about executive privilege. Rachel pressed harder. Finally, the secretary admitted, I don't recall any vote on that. Margaret's face flickered red, then pale, then back again. The mask was slipping. Still, she tried to push through, snapping about disruptive residents, until neighbors around the room started whispering their own horror stories. Garden gnomes find. Kids chalked drawings labeled graffiti. It was like group therapy. And when John leaned over to me afterward and said, I've got development rights paperwork you need to see, I realized we were standing on the edge of something much bigger. The very next day, Rachel practically kicked down my door with a folder full of receipts from another neighbor. 3 years of meticulous documentation of Margaret's scams. Meanwhile, I got a text from an unknown number. Heard you're asking questions. Meet me at the coffee shop. I have information you need. I showed up, and sitting across from me was the former HOA treasurer, a woman named Linda. Hands shaking, she slid over emails where Margaret had literally written, bill the tree removal at my residence to the HOA. Use the storm damage template. I read it twice, my stomach turning. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was fraud with fake emergencies, forged paperwork, and nearly $50,000 siphoned in under 3 years. By then, I wasn't nervous, I was furious. And when Margaret tried to retaliate by citing me for excessive porch lighting, I almost thanked her. Every petty violation was another piece of evidence of her desperation. Saturday, I filed my own official request under her very own rulebook. A community enhancement event allowed me to reserve visitor parking for 7 days. My reason? A housewarming celebration. She had no choice but to approve it. And so, with Rachel's help, we threw the most passive-aggressive festival this neighborhood had ever seen. Balloons, banners, even a guest sign-in table parked right where her Mercedes had lived for 3 years. Every morning, she had to march 3 blocks in her heels while we sipped coffee on my porch, cheerfully waving. Beautiful day for some exercise, isn't it? By midweek, she cracked. She stormed into the crowd of neighbors at my celebration, binder in hand, voice shaking with rage. This outsider is destroying everything we've built. He doesn't belong here. I kept flipping burgers, calm as could be, and said, want one? We've got plenty. That was the wrong move. Her face turned purple, and then she screamed the line that ended her reign forever. I know exactly how much you make. $2. $800 a month. You can't afford this place. The whole yard went silent. Phones were out. She'd just confessed, in front of 40 witnesses, to having illegal access to my financial records. That's not an HOA matter. That's a federal crime. And right on cue, Officer Rivera pulled up, took down witness statements, and informed her that unauthorized access to private income information carries serious penalties. She tried backpedaling, claiming it was an estimate, but the exact number she'd blurted out made that defense laughable. By Monday, she called an emergency meeting to try and bury me. She came armed with photos of my car, my clothes, even my income, trying to paint me as a dangerous outsider. But when I stood up and read her own emails aloud, billing her divorce lawyer to the HOA, fabricating emergency invoices, siphoning off tens of thousands, neighbors gasped. Rachel dismantled her medical exemption lie piece by piece. And just when I thought we'd won, John stepped forward, carrying a folder like it was a gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice steady, my name is John Bennett. I am the original developer of this subdivision. And as master landholder, I retained rights over the association. Effective immediately, Margaret Stone's presidency is terminated, her residency revoked, and her actions referred for criminal prosecution. He laid out deeds, Contracts, signatures, all proof. Margaret's jaw dropped. She collapsed back in her chair as neighbors started clapping, some even cheering. John turned to me with a smile that finally made sense. You've got skills, son. Reading people, spotting scams, standing up when it matters. I own 47 communities across 3 states. Margaret isn't the only one. How'd you like a job cleaning house where leadership's gone off the rails? I left that meeting not just as the guy who stood up to a tyrant, but with an actual job offer in a community that finally breathed free. A month later, Margaret was gone, packed up in a moving truck, humiliated, her little empire in ruins. In her old spot, the neighborhood put up a wooden sign that simply read, "Community First." Rachel opened a cafe funded by money recovered from the fraud. And me? 6 months later, I got a package from a desperate neighborhood in Texas with $5,000 in cash and a note. "We heard what you did here. Our situation is worse. Please help." That's when John leaned over my shoulder, glanced at the photos, and whispered, "We need to talk." So now I've got to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes?